So, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about building an operator using Kubebuilder today. Let's jump right into the agenda. I'm going to talk a bit about Kubebuilder, and then we are going to do, well, basically live coding, where I'm going to run a few commands that you need with Kubebuilder to get like a basic setup for an operator. And then based on that, yeah, we're gonna see what we would need to do next after those commands. And yeah, well, we're gonna build an operator today. So yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
So regarding Kubebuilder, it's a project from one of the many Kubernetes special interest groups, also six for short. After documentation available at book.kubebuilder.io. I would recommend to check it out before you start your own journey. And as a big important requirement, you should know Golang. Like you should, if you're completely new to Golang, it will probably be, well, it will be hard for you because it's not just running a few commands with Kubebuilder and you have everything, but you need to write your own logic in Go, like what would happen if a custom resource definition, like your custom object you created is created and all, or like even deleted and so on. So yeah, so you should know your way around Golang. Not necessarily, you know, on an expert level, but good enough that you would be able to like pick up on like kind of principles of how you can work with client Go, and yeah. Where's my wait. So one additional point before we're gonna jump into Kubebuilder and working with it right now. The first thing you want to do is you don't want to install Kubebuilder and, well, Golang if you haven't yet. Then the next would be we're going to initiate the operator, depending on if you already have a repository. I would recommend initiating the repository as well. The third thing is the creating the APIs, or more or less the CRDs. And a fourth would be, well, it's optional. We're going to do this just to have kind of like a whole example, which is adding validation and having a way, well, to set defaults for those objects. And the fifth, we're gonna, well, we're probably not gonna do that in this meeting, not this meeting, in this webinar, but then you would add your controller/operator logic for your created API/CRDs as Go code. And well, from there on, already it's ready to use. So to get started with the whole thing, as said, we need to initiate. Well, we need to init the whole. We need to init like the framework, like the, you know, the basic scaffolding for the operator using Kubebuilder. You can just run Kubebuilder init, and then we need to specify a domain. In my case, I'm just using well, my private domain here for demonstration. And then the second command here, the Kubebuilder create API. With that, you can create the whole CRD. In this case, I'm creating a CRD called App Monitor as version 1 alpha 1. In the group app monitoring, we're going to see it later on how this will affect the whole code. And as the third step for adding like the optional validation and defaulting functionality, we have the Kubebuilder create webhook targeting the app monitor, the CRD that we have created one step earlier, and specifying the flags that we have defaulting and programming validation enabled for the CRD.
So Alex, one question in there for
understanding it better. So the second command line in here, it will take me, or the advantage is here that I can use this to automatically create a CRD, right? So I don't need now to write the YAML file, but this command, it creates the CRD for me, right? So this is one of the advantages that you see here from an automation perspective.
Yeah, to a certain extent, it's taking off that weight from your shoulders there, but you will probably, well, depending on how far you want to go, you probably want to write the YAML, or will improve the YAML that is generated to contain more information for Kubernetes on how the structure is looking, which will also make it easier if you use, what is it called, kubectl explain, to like dive into an object, to have like descriptions and such. But that's, well, it is a good thing to do, but it is optional thing to do. We can dive into that later on what the generated files will look like. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Before I'm going into that, I'm going to push my code to github.com/galaxy.t/application-monitoring-operator, because the goal is to have, not just do some random example, but in this case to really cover a real-world scenario, which is that for a lot of people, they just want to create one object with their application, and with that get like the whole monitoring with Prometheus and alerting, even depending on if they have enabled that and all those things. And having such a meta operator is more or less the goal, at least of even that project, so that we have a real world use case, and I'm not just gonna create some hello world case example. So
sounds great.
So let me jump. No, this was one too far. Let me jump over here. Okay, so I'm in my repository. I simply have, I hope you should be able to still see my screen, Jurlind, right?
Yes,
Just to make sure.
Yes.
Perfect. Did I just run that command? Oh no, sorry, let me quickly reset my everything to normal. Sorry about that. I was very certain I had my repository cleaned up for the webinar. So as we headed with the flow, I have my repository. In my case, I simply have, well, a license file. I have a README file, which, simply, well, this is a meta operator, and just a bit of a description. In the end, I will probably add much more information to this one. But I have my repository set up so that I can track the whole code. And now I'm just going to run the Kubebuilder in it, pointing, in my case, to my domain. Like, it doesn't, the domain is more or less just like a virtual thing. It's just something that is appended to the APIs that we create to kind of distinguish them from others. Because I'm not sure, maybe for the people that haven't worked too much with CRDs, you can create multiple objects which have the same name. And already in Kubernetes itself, you have a bunch of things, or not a bunch, but a few things where they kind of override each other, override in quotes, meaning that, for example, you have the ingress objects. I think the ingress object is the best example if you're on the latest like 1.19 Kubernetes version, because in 1.19 you have the old ingress API. You have the new one, which is a networking, I think it was networking KDS.io or somewhere. And there's, I think that was it, but you already have two objects which have the same name. And it's important to keep in mind that basically based on those API groups, it's to distinguish them. Okay, so we're gonna just go ahead, run Kubebuilder init with the domain flag here. I didn't completely initialize my project because for Golang, I quickly need to go ahead and set up my Go modules, my Go mod file. I can simply do that by running go mod init, and then the path, the import path basically, as it's on GitHub, it's basically really, as I typed it already, it's github.com/galaxy/application-monitoring-operator. So I'm just gonna do that. Now I have my Go mod file. So now we can hopefully finally run the Kubebuilder init command. Oh, and there we go. Now what Kubebuilder is doing, it's going through like this, it's generating all the scaffold parts and stuff. It's, for example, here running go get to retrieve the dependencies we have, or well, we need in the end. It's, you know, well, making sure the Go mod file is clean. And in the end, it's even running make to run generation for our code, and also do you know, code cleanliness things like go fmt, go vet to like format and vet the code, and then in the end build the manager. So now, after we've done this, we can, as we had it, the next step, we just now simply go ahead and create the API. We want to create the CRD app monitor. Mm-hmm. We want it to be version 1 v1 alpha 1. Maybe a few words on that, why it's v1 alpha 1 and not, for example, v1. The reason for that is that I want to be able to further maybe change this object. I can do this programmatically, like I can, with these webhooks and all that, I can do that. And then well, in the future I will do that. But it's, you know, especially when you're getting started, it's important that people more or less, you know, from the versioning kind of realize that, hey, this is still alpha or something, and that people don't use it because it's like, oh, it's v1, so it's stable, you know, kind of as like with Kubernetes. We have those alpha things, which like, well, depending on what it is, you might or might not should use in production. And the same goes for certain beta features for Kubernetes as well, like Ingress. Again, coming back to, well, to the previous example. Ingress is and was in version 1 beta 1 a long time. And with 1.19, they finally kind of, you know, threw a lot of beta stuff out and finally pushed it towards stable, and they're like reorganized it. And it's, you know, as I said, it's important to just have a bit of an indication on how stable the whole thing is.
One question in here. So when you create this CRD, so you have the opportunity to say, well, the CRD is namespace scoped or cluster-wide scoped. So you have the possibility here also, while you now somehow automatically generating.
Yeah, I have the possibility to make it global or well, cluster-wide.
Or names.
In my case, I don't want to do that, and to put it like that, I think unless someone has a very good reason to have something on a global scope, good on bringing up, but I would well, yeah, like if you need that, you should make sure that it's really fitting your case. Because if it's namespace, if it's not namespaced, if it's cluster-wide, you can't really restrict permissions too much on it. So yeah, but at least for this case, it's, well, it must be kind of namespaced, because every person should be able to create an app monitor object in the namespace if they want, to get a Prometheus, even a load manager and all those things if they need and want. And yeah, so I'm gonna just run a command, say, yep, I want to create the resource, I want to create the controller. It's running again. It has generated those files. Oops, let me remark that up. And then it ran make again to, well, kind of more or less ensure to me, hey, the code is still buildable. And let's take a look at this before we run the last command, or well, the last command right now. So now let me just make it like this.
So now we should be able to see an API endpoint with that, right?
Depends on how you define API endpoint, but yeah. What we have here in the API v1 alpha 1, I have my type here. Like there's a bunch of things I still wouldn't want to do. like fix up the boilerplate, like the top part for my license header. And for example, where do we have it? I think I just scrolled over it. Oh, here we go. And I want to edit my own fields right now. So for example, what I want to do is, let's say, to just keep it simple. Well, let's really keep it very simple and say, well, this is Prometheus, or like, let's keep it really simple. Prometheus image to use for the deployed Prometheus object. So let's, we could, we can name it better, like Prometheus image or something. We need to add those tags. This is required. I need to name it as I want the field to be named. So I would put it at this box here. And bam, I have my new field. But that's not all. I need to run make after I have added a field here. It means that I go to my terminal again, run make.
So it needs to compile again, right? So that is the point.
Yeah, the first thing, it's compiling again, and the most important part, which is happening as the first thing here, it's it's generating, well, it's updating / generating certain files that might have, because I've added a new field, have been created. Or, well, to be more specific here, this stuff here, this CC generated, these are the generated files. These are like generated, this is generated code, depending on what fields, like I could add new structs here and have them in the spec, for example. And then there might be new code added here because of random make. It is important to have that. And that's the cool thing. I said, like, if I want to run make, bam, that's it. And now I have my operator, well, manager, they call it here. I can just, let me do -- help or something. This is my operator. It's working, basically.
Cool.
And that's a cool thing here. But as we had it earlier, it's not, we're not done. Like it's not doing anything right now. What we need to do is in the controllers folder, there's the app, in my case, appmonitor_controller.go. And that is where we need to put our own logic. For example, here, I would need to I would write my code to create like a Prometheus object. So I'm just gonna, add a to-do here. To-do create Prometheus object based on based on the object that has been passed here. I can also quickly go ahead and if my code search isn't gonna screw me over here. Wow, wonderful. And well, yeah, I would basically go ahead and write my logic here based on the on like my fields I have here. Like I would, for example, use the Prometheus images field and throw that into the Prometheus object and so on and so on. Yeah.
So there you define the functionality that this operator is actually what is doing at the end of the day, right? So what is
exactly
the task that is fulfilling in the cluster.
Like for example, I would create the Prometheus object and like I would have an if condition if in my app monitor object like alerting is enabled or something. Then I would like if alerting is enabled basically, then create, and that would be then actual code.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you give maybe, let's say, a kind of very small example? So let's say in a kind of real world example, like the CRDs are mainly there to extend the API functionality. So it's if something it's not default by Kubernetes. So this is a way you can extend the functionality of it, right? And this helps you to do this as well as seamlessly as possible. But of course, in this case, as you're saying, you need to be aware of what kind of functionality are you asking for, what kind of functionality you are extending. So you should know actually what you're implementing, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah. So you would need to write the logic here,
Mm.
but you know, you only need to react on, hey, my object has been created, and that's basically all. So it's simply making life of the life easier when you want to write an operator.
Mm.
And that's already great. Like I said, like I would just need to plug in my conditions and stuff to generate my objects and apply them to the Kubernetes cluster right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So the thing you mentioned with the CRDs earlier, with like the code being generated and all.
Mm.
The thing is that exactly in the config directory,
Mm.
we have. Let me get that right, because these are a lot of files. Because you have your Airbox stuff, you probably need to change this depending on what your operator will do in the end.
So
you're not coming around those things. Like you must update those.
So this all files that we see on the left that have been generated, let's say, within this kind of project or package or whatever you want to call it, and you name it, they have been generated by default, and then you need to work on them as necessary, right? So
exactly.
as you put the airbox, so you need to think about what permissions you want to allow your operator to be given, right?
Exactly. Like for example here, it is a just plain simple example. It will not be automatically updated. That would be awesome if it would be, but it's then it would be too restricting if I would have a different comment in the YAML than in my code. Which we can argue if that is good, that a comment in the code is different for the field than what it is in the actual example file. But well, it's at least I just need to put in my new fields and stuff, add some cool comments, and that's better than having to write all those things up and like even realizing how do I create like the services and all those things for my webhook, which we haven't done yet. It's the last part which is about adding defaulting logic and programmatic validation. It's called programmatic validation in this case. So I'm just gonna run this. Bam, it's already done. And as simply have another file in which I need to to do user, where I need to do to add my logic here, for example, for the defaulting. Like I could go and say if like what we did create like a Prometheus image here. So if come on, here. If my spec here, if the Prometheus in it is empty, I could like force it here to Quay.io. Well, let's go with Docker.io. I know those paths from Prometheus, for example. And well, we probably want to put a cool version behind it. And such things. So with that, I would basically have my defaulting done. Because if someone creates the object and has the webhook has not followed the normal installation here, they would get this set on their object, which is great. Yeah. And the same, like I can for validation, I can do validation on creating when the object has been created. I can do validation when the object has been updated. And if I enable it here, I can even, as the comment says here, I can even enable validation on when it's going to be deleted, which is like a cool thing where when an operator could interact with and well, validate simply that like there's nothing wrong in the object, and in the more common Kubernetes versions, even respond back to the user with, hey, this is wrong, and not just throw some weird issue with like, yeah, failed to apply or something, and with some generic error message, which makes life easier for everyone there as well. And again, you know, we have the whole generated code, and we just throw in our own logic, and we're done, so to say, with that.
So to say, if you don't use Kubebuilder, you need to create all of these files by yourself, and
Yes.
then in addition to implementing the logic, so in there you have really a very beautiful template that you can make use of it. So it makes your life easier, and it makes you focus on the specific tasks that you want to solve rather than
exactly. Like there's, don't get me wrong, there's other tools available which go into the same direction, or even try to be like a more generic approach. There's basically really nothing for you to do, but then, you know, throw some commands or something out there, or like the Ansible operator, for example, it can run Ansible stuff for you. Though it's exactly those things where, from experience, for some cases, you know, like Ansible, yeah, you can easily get started because, you know, just throw together some Ansible code, like kind of like this right now. Oh, I don't want to delete this. But it's depending on how often your CRD, like your custom object, is used in a cluster, the Ansible operator might get to a limit where it's like easier to use native Golang, well, and more native language like Golang to completely implement the operator. And if you have Go knowledge, this would be the way to go, I think. For there's a few things that, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh well, like the main.go being in a root folder, you can argue about that for certain scenarios that might be problematic. But in itself, Kubebuilder gets you pretty good scaffold to get started, to creating an operator, and yeah, well.
So let's assume maybe before, so we get to the end, so I'd like to understand a little bit more. So you were talking about app monitoring as an example. So how would this, for example, well, we know Prometheus is an app that monitors your Kubernetes cluster. So how would now your extension, or how do you see your extension as an abstraction layer on top of that? So what is the ideas that you have on extending that actually?
Well, it's not really, well, it is an extension, but it's really just more or less to have a meta operator, to have a meta object for ease of use for the people which are not as experienced yet with Prometheus and such. For example, like a Prometheus operator. So I can just tell them, hey, you want to monitor your applications, and they would go ahead, create this app monitor object, and it would, you know, like spit out like the default Prometheus configured to scrape everything with like the prometheus.io/scrape something labels and so on, so, or annotations, and, you know, just to have an easy start for the people. And even for some more advanced cases, allow certain configurations to be overridden, that the people that are more experienced with it already also just have the easy, I just create my app monitor object and, like, for example, throw in my config, and yeah, well.
So this, for example, would allow us, let's assume, so we have a kind of app, be this monitoring or whatever, then this would allow us to create an operator that is, let's say, compliant to a certain standard, that its configuration is set as such as, for example, it fulfills some security requirements or some privacy requirements. So I can go ahead and use the general Prometheus, but then I would need to do all this stuff by manually, right? But you would then be able to implement this and provide this operator to the outside world, and so people can just use this and say, okay, we're ready to go, right? Or am I?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it a bit too broad with security or something in mind. Well, it would as the name with meta operator implies there, it is simply a wrapper around those other objects, a meta operator to make it easier. Like security wise, well, you could, like I think that is even an idea I had to like automatically configure authentication proxies for each component. So it is a security part, but in the end, it's simply I need to implement it.
Yeah, sure. You
That's
need
the
to
question of me
implement the
implementing
logic.
it
Yeah,
safely and then,
yeah, you need to implement the logic. That's for sure. That is what I was saying. So you can see this both as a kind of, as you say, as a meta operator, as a generalist of this specific objects or specific, let's say, operators. But you can also see this as a specialization of those, right? So where you build this wrapper around, but you specialize in a specific, let's say, functionality that you then need to write in here.
Well, yeah, that would be what an operator is doing. Like you would have one CAD which normally tries to do one thing good, and at least for this case, it should do app monitoring easy by implementing by creating Prometheus object, and depending on if alerting and such is wanted, to add alerting object and such as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Alex. It's great.
So as I said, I'm going to push the code, I think even as it is right now, after the webinar. I'm continuing to work on this project as I have, as I simply see it as a use case, and have seen it too often implementing it in some weird ways or something at customers. So this is my try to, hey, let's just have something, try it to be a generic application monitoring operator, which is to a certain extent opinionated. Yeah. As we have talked about, operators and such, we just want to raise a bit of awareness for a vanilla stack there, as we're more and more trying to look into operators in general. We're trying to use use the idea behind operators for making vanilla stack, which is a project from which is an open source project from Cloudical, to make it good but make it better, using the concept of operators. And feel free to check it out. Here's the architecture if you're interested. Vanillastack.io is the website of it. And that was at least everything from my side. And do we have any questions in the chat?
Questions, yeah. So far we don't have any questions. So, but are there any questions from
that wasn't the right
to the topic, and or interesting points that you would like to ask?
So, if there are no questions, as we had it, feel free to check out kubebuilder.io for their website regarding the building an operator. They also have a great getting started guide. As you should know your Golang, you should know Golang. But if you know the basics, I think it is a good way to at least have the most complicated parts there. So you can easily continue or build on that. And as I said, besides that, feel free to also check out vanillastack.io. And thanks for being here, and see you in the next one, which is, help me, Jurlind, 2 weeks?
Yes.
It was 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Thank you. So we'll see each other in 2 weeks, and have a good day.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you everyone for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.